look at some of the financing aspects for individuals, businesses and local institutions, which is an equally crucial part of the move towards a more sustainable and resilient society. So, Tony, I'm going to hand over to you now if you would like to do that.
Thank you very much, Jill, and good afternoon, everyone. I've got a few slides as well, so I'll pop that up on the screen now. Now, I've met a few of you, and I know some of you are familiar with the South West Mutual proposition, but I've just got a few things that are picking out on the themes of, building more resilient financial institutions and also connecting with energy. So I'll get onto those shortly. But those who aren't too familiar, this is the summary of what South West Mutual is all about. We are in our journey towards getting a banking license. It's a long and arduous journey, I have to say, but we progress along it. The first mission-driven regional mutual bank, that's the plan. And we're about serving small businesses, but also, very importantly, social community enterprises and not-for-profit sector, as well as personal banking with a financial inclusion mission as part of our overall plans. And just in terms of scale, we're looking to build a loan book of around about 500 million. I mean, if we can do more, we'll do more. Let's just see. But that's what we're planning in terms of scale. So those of you familiar with credit unions will immediately probably recognise that would make us about 100 times larger than the average UK credit union. We're not a credit union. We're nothing like one. Looking to be complementary to them, actually. And in terms of investors, because we're a social enterprise, we talk about a double dividend. So one is, to deliver what I like to describe as sensible financial returns over the long term in the form of dividends on the shares. But also, importantly, our social, economic and environmental impacts we intend to not just identify, but also measure and report on. And these align very closely with local authorities for sure, but also other anchor institutions of which we are seeking to be one. This is just to point to there being a whole load of evidence about this kind of bank outside the UK, where they are extremely commonplace in almost all comparable economies, and they produce a whole host of public benefits from more SME lending, more savings devoted to the real economy instead of financial speculation, higher rates of financial inclusion amongst households, individuals. Importantly for our part of the world, the evidence demonstrates that it sort of is a counterweight to the regional economic inequalities that develop without strong regional and financial institutions. And finally, it makes local economies more resilient to recession. I'm not going to go through all of those 5 in detail today, but if you're interested, do follow up with me for more. I did want to talk about this one though, which was SME Finance. We actually talk about in our documentation SMOs. So where SME is normally small and medium-sized enterprise, we like to talk about small and medium-sized organisations, just to make the point that it's not just for-profit businesses that are important here. And the chart is just showing how the largest 9 UK banks who publish this data have significantly reduced the amount of credit within the Great Southwest region over time, and that hasn't been made up by new lenders. Now, they will argue that's because people don't want to borrow. Well, that's a little bit true. Businesses will only want to borrow if they see some point in it economically. But there's lots of evidence that shows gaps in supply of certain sorts of businesses. I think it's really interesting, this trust deficit point. So in the Southwest particularly, there are statistics that show that businesses say that they could grow their business, or they could grow the productivity of their business, but they're not going to, because they don't want to borrow from a bank because they don't trust the bank to stick with them over the long term. So that's some sort of lost economic potential, if you like. The underserved niches, I've already pointed to this. We think there's a whole host of organisations in Devon and the wider Southwest who are badly served by existing banks. That includes cooperative societies, of which we are one, which most banks don't even recognise as a form of corporate ownership. There's the growing trend of employee ownership, social enterprises and community enterprises as a distinct. We also think that we can quite simply offer better banking services to town and parish councils, actually, who have money that perhaps they would like to see reinvested back into the local economy via a local bank. This is just something about our model for those not familiar. I won't labour the point, but we're very different from other banks. Customers are our shareholders, one member, one vote, a fair remuneration policy, plain vanilla banking, but importantly with face-to-face banking and humans able to actually make decisions and sort out problems. These are all the benefits of being smaller scale, actually, to be able to offer that service. The products are everything you'd expect from a small but perfectly formed high street bank. I put these arrows in here to make quite an important point in terms of the concept of community wealth building, though, which is that although our region on certain traditional economic measures is not wealthy, there are enormous quantities of bank deposits and personal savings, and indeed business deposits in the region that currently effectively leak out of the region, up to the financial centre for use for all sorts of things we probably don't want them used for, such as financing fossil fuel companies and financial speculation. Our proposition is to capture those savings and to recirculate them locally into the things that we want, real economy lending we want. And that means the interest being paid by those local borrowers is just flowing back to other residents in the region as the returns on their savings. So it's reinvesting the money we already have back in the region. Quick note on distribution channels, state-of-art digital, but importantly, we are looking to have a branch presence as well as offering access through post office and convenience stores for cash paying in and withdrawals. So the social, economic, environmental impacts, just to get to some of the themes of today. I won't go through the whole of that list, but it is worth saying that the economic benefits that we can identify and want to measure on are ones which do impact positively, or should be expected to impact positively, on local authority finances. Clearly a healthier business sector, contributes towards rates or indeed rents where councils do own commercial property. Supporting, we're about trying to sort of support high streets and footfall into those, as well as job creation and preservation, of course. In the social, again, financial inclusion, if we can reduce the poverty premium paid by residents who don't have bank accounts and therefore end up paying a lot more to national utility providers or indeed to payday lenders, then we can put that money back in their pockets, which is where it should be. But actually what they're likely to do is go and spend it locally in local shops. So that, again, that's recapturing money that's currently escaping, being paid by the most vulnerable financially people in our community, and recapturing that locally as well as helping their finances. The social, stakeholder and charitable sectors I've mentioned, we think don't have very well tailored services and products. And I think that, banks don't really understand mission-driven businesses. They don't always want to lend to them or at favourable rates. We want to support that sector. Environmental, now, we've talked a lot about retrofit today. That's a product we think clearly there's a need for, as well as supporting businesses to become greener, and to particularly target to lend to green businesses, as in things like retrofitting companies or community energy companies. But I want to sort of say a word about net zero finance. So this chart, I will explain it, but it comes from a very recent report done for the Committee for Climate Change, or the Climate Change Committee, and it's about the financing needs of this net zero journey. And I have highlighted, they recommend that the annual investment needs to go up from about 10 billion a year to about 50 billion a year in the UK. And I've picked out three big chunks of that. The bottom one, that purpley one, you see picks up considerably. That's the additional cost of surface transport of going to zero carbon vehicles. Some of that will be for individuals to buy electric vehicles. I'm personally don't think that electric cars are the escape clause from our current transport problems. We need a lot more public transport as well. But electric vehicles are part of the mix. We are absolutely not going to finance anyone to buy a fossil fuel car, but we absolutely will be financing people to buy bikes and electric bikes and electric vehicles. But that identifies the scale of the need. The next one up is what we've been talking about. Now, this will be primarily private sector. So, as Ian said, it makes sense to start with the social sector, but we're all aware that we are going to have to enable all owners of their own houses to also retrofit them. And, here the numbers are a little bit scary, because we estimate that across Cornwall, Devon, Somerset and Dorset, there's about 590,000 houses that are energy rated D or below. Now, to get anywhere near this zero carbon economy, they all have to be C or above, and a significant proportion a lot better than C. So there is an absolute massive need. And at an average spend per house of 15,000, just in order to produce a figure, I'm not saying that's the right figure, but it is one that's used a bit in the industry, that suggests we need £9 billion of finance for private home retrofit in our southwest region over the coming decades. And the final one up there is electricity investment. So some of that, again, is going to be solar panels on roofs. It's going to be, it will be community energy projects. I mean, others of that number will be large offshore wind and so on and so forth. But some of it, again, is at the private householder level. So there's a significant need for finance. And I think for us, the question is not just about whether there'll be enough finance available for it, but will it be available on fair terms? And will it be available in a way that tries to be as inclusive as possible? Because absolutely, those two pieces of the puzzle, the fair terms and the inclusivity, are part of our mission as South West Mutual in a way that, frankly, I don't expect them to be part of Barclays' mission. So just to conclude then, community wealth building, we think, is a really promising approach to understanding how local authorities can have a meaningful impact in practical ways on social justice and local economy. And you probably, this audience, very familiar with it, but you'll know that one of the 5 principles is making financial power work for local places. And I've described in a number of ways how we think that can happen for the benefit of the local area. But it's not the only policy sort of support for this kind of approach. There's just a list there of other think tanks and or politicians that have also sort of suggested that regional mutual banks can play a positive role. Actually, that's in there for completeness, but it's our journey towards becoming a bank. If there's a number to pick out, it's just that to capitalise it, we are going to need 20 million plus. And we are talking to local authorities about potentially being the shareholders in that, to get that double dividend of a financial return, but also the social, economic, environmental impacts. So I'll wrap it up there with a nice picture. I'm really happy to have a discussion.
Thank you very much, Tony. That's a very attractive prospect. Are there any questions to Tony? And you can always indicate with your hand on the screen if you prefer.
Thanks, Tony. I saw a presentation you gave maybe nearly a year ago, and I was really impressed then. And once again, it's really great to hear you talk about this. I find it really exciting. I'm interested, a year on from when I last heard this, how are you guys doing? What if any challenges are you facing, and what kind of support might you be looking for? I know that you mentioned using local authorities to help, and I know that Southamptonshire Council was part of your first funding round. But yeah, just interested to hear kind of what you guys are needing to take the next steps.
Yeah, thanks. Well, in terms of progress specifically over the last year, we think we've probably lost about 6 months as a result of the disruption of COVID. Although, I count my lucky stars daily that I'm A, haven't suffered any personal loss, and B, don't own a restaurant or work in the NHS. So I'm not doing a woe is me, but nevertheless, our project has been delayed because the investment climate was extremely difficult over the summer. We had to put our stuff on hold, more or less. So we've lost a bit of time, but we have done some important milestones, particularly with our progress on the banking license application, which is within our control. In terms of where we're local authorities, well, we're continuing to talk to a number of them, and it's just trying to get into a position where there are sufficient commitments to capitalise the bank that we know we can proceed. So at the moment, with varying degrees of enthusiasm. We are talking to most of the local authorities in the region. Interesting about local authority conversation, I think, is it's really important to be able to talk across the different roles, because it's easy to pigeonhole this as a business intervention, and it is one, but it absolutely, as you got from the presentation, it is not just about trying to fill in gaps in SME finance. It is about creating a partner financial institution that, through the design of its model and its mission, is trying to deliver across the carbon element, the environmental element of net zero carbon, and the social justice element of that road to net zero carbon. And so, but one of the difficulties, particularly with larger councils, is then sort of trying to join up all those policy objectives. But because we think that the bank model does speak to a number of them. So that there's, you know, it's taken me a bit of time to get to know the different people working across different roles. But, you know, we are speaking, you know, I'm getting introduced to new you know, council officers, you know, frequently, who are like, oh yeah, no, this is really relevant for what we're doing. So, you know, it'll take time, but we're getting there.
Thanks very much, Tony. Paul, you've got a question.
I'm just conscious that there's a growing